really think that by getting more police powers, more restrictions on protest, more restrictions on immigration, more laws, more legislation, more everything, surveillance, that's not going to protect shit. And it's going to make everyone less safe, everyone more on edge. And frankly, it's giving the fascists, which includes Nazis and Islamic State fans, they're all a fascist ideology. It gives them exactly what they want.
Hello, welcome back to Bogan Intel. Yaakov Aharon is a journalist, and you may have known him from a previous podcast. Yaakov joins us today for a pretty solemn episode as he speaks about the horrific shooting in Bondi that claimed 15 lives, injured many more, and sent ripples through the Australian society, who in the aftermath are left piecing together not only questions about what happened, but what will happen in the future. Yaakov comes from the Chabad community that was attacked in Bondi and was raised in places that are familiar to Jews of Sydney. He shares a powerful and unique insight into what it is to be an activist, a journalist, but also a member of Sydney's Jewish community. And he provides a reflection on how he feels in the wake of this horrible attack. Yaakov is one of the best people in the country to provide some detail and context around these events, including what they could mean for personal freedoms and for the fate of this country in the future. So please stick around for a sober but very necessary interview with Yaakov Aharon. Thanks for coming back to the program, Yaakov. Good to see you, mate.
Good to see you.
It's a bit of a strange day for us to be catching up again. And we've had you on the program to talk about something that was quite tragic and remarkable that happened on Sunday. And I was just wondering, as a member of Sydney's Jewish community, if you could say a few words about the tragedy on Sunday.
Yeah, well, 16 people died, 35 or a bit more than that injured, shot. Two terrorists targeted a Jewish communal event on Bondi Beach, the famous Bondi Beach in Sydney. They were celebrating Hanukkah out in the park, in the public, and these terrorists just went to town on, this massive crowd that included little children, their parents, Holocaust survivors, rabbis and communal leaders. And, they were shooting from a vantage point, a bridge, for about 10 minutes before they were finally stopped. There were quite a few heroes who tried to step in and disarm them. Two of those heroes were killed. Another one shot twice. So at least silver lining, we were shown that when push comes to shove, there are quite a few heroes out there who are really willing to risk their lives to save some innocent people on a beach.
And can you speak to some of the victims, who the victims are?
Yeah, there were two rabbis from the ultra-Orthodox community known as Chabad Lubavitch. They're very prominent in Bondi and generally speaking, prominent in leadership positions in the Jewish community in synagogues pretty much around the world. There was a girl, I believe 10 years old, named Matilda, who died. Two elderly Jewish Russian people who, just as the terrorists were stepping out of the car, loaded up with their guns out. These Jewish Russians, they weren't even celebrating Hanukkah. They were just walking on the footpath, and they were like, "Hey, this is not right." So they jumped in and tried to, straight away take the guns off the terrorists, and they were shot for that.
Mm.
An elderly couple. There was a Holocaust survivor, a man who tried to shield his wife from the bullets. She survived, he did not. And yeah, absolute bedlam.
Yeah, and the biggest act of political violence that our country's seen, and it's just something that just rings horror throughout the nation in the aftermath. Wanting to ask you about your connection to Sydney's Jewish community, particular Bondi, uh, and yeah, how you were sort of raised within that community.
Yeah, so um, for context, there's probably around 120,000 or so Jews living in Australia. Um, Maybe 50,000 of those live in Sydney. And then within that, there is already, you're talking about a community where you're splitting hairs in a population like Australia with 30 or so million. Um, Everyone knows everyone in the Jewish community. There's, 2 degrees of separation between most of those 50,000 people. And then there's the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, the Chabad Lubavitch community. We're talking probably about 1,000. And these are the ones who tend to really host events that are public facing, that are trying to make people more religious, and bring outsiders in. They're the sorts who, maybe if you visit a Jewish neighborhood in Saturday, they're, wearing their black hats with the black gowns and beards. And, growing up, I had about 8 hours of, let's say, religious activities per day. Um, and there was a little hole in the fence of my backyard leading straight to the synagogue on the other side of the fence.
Mm.
And that was, sometimes the only time we really left the house. It was just to and from the synagogue next door through the hole in the fence. And, we rented directly from the rabbi of the community. So it's a very, very much a small town feeling, like growing up, even in Bondi, we didn't actually go to Bondi Beach per se because it wasn't considered modest. Of course, the park nearby is fine, but to you're not supposed to stare too much at naked skin, So someone who's shirtless on the beach is just considered a bit hedonistic. It's a very small community, insular community, strict, conservative, um, and very pious.
As someone that was raised in the Chabad movement, how does Chabad define the Jewish community, and how does the Jewish community define the life of Bondi?
Chabad defines the community. It's pretty simple. Just, if you are born Jewish, you are Jewish, and you will always be Jewish. Whether you eat bacon and start worshipping Thor, and become a serial killer, if you were born Jewish, you are still part of the Jewish people. That'll never change. You can't convert out. And of course, it only passes from mother to the children and so on. It only passes maternally. Of course, you can convert in. Chabad tends to be pretty strict on the conversion process. So, it takes quite a bit longer with quite a bit more studies. It's almost like a course to join in.
And how does the Jewish community define Bondi?
How does it define Bondi? Well, Bondi is much more than just a Chabad Jewish neighborhood. It's a very Jewish neighborhood, generally speaking. I mean, there's also modern Orthodox groups there. There is secular Jews. There's kind of just people whose identity is culturally Jewish. We sometimes joke they call them, Seinfeld Jews. Um, and of course, people who express their Judaism pretty much solely through the political ideology of Zionism as well.
Mhm.
So there is a diverse bunch, and of course, among all of that, you still get, I would guess, roughly 80% of Bondi's non-Jewish, and mostly they live there because they tend to be middle to upper class. They like the summer, and they like to go to the beach 5 days a week. So there's quite a bit of diversity actually in Bondi insofar as the religious atmosphere.
Mhm. And that diversity was captured at that family day by the beach on Sunday, essentially, right?
Yeah, yeah, lifeguards, non-Jewish lifeguards risk their lives. Ahmed Al-Ahmed, a Muslim fruit shop owner, originally from Sutherland in the south of Sydney, was visiting Bondi and became a hero, legendary hero. Um, so, of course, it is still Bondi, and it isn't just for the locals. We're right just before the Christmas season. A lot of Australians celebrate the Christmas season by going to the beach. It was a nice sunny day, and so all sorts of people were there, and just about Ahmed Al Ahmed. I mean, you couldn't possibly get a more Muslim name than that. It's almost like um, the screenwriters threw this little plot twist in there, just to you know throw a little obstacle in the way of anyone who was trying to use this as an excuse for Islamophobia. Um, you have a guy like Ahmed Al Ahmed running straight at the terrorist gunmen, and trying to disarm them, actually doing it, and um, getting shot twice, going to hospital. He's now nominated for Australian of the Year. So if anyone deserves it, if anyone I think um, is the best among us in this land with 30 million people, I think he's probably coming for the top spot.
You point to something there, Yakov, that's really important. And there's a unique characteristic to a national tragedy that appears. And Australia has unique characteristics, I think. And they were displayed on that day, from the nature of the barbecue itself on the shoreline of an Australian beach. To the nature of the hero that came to save the day, Ahmed Al Ahmed. It's a real sign of something that stands out when Australians are surrounded by tragedy is this common response where people jump in. And in an act of violence that we haven't really seen since Port Arthur, how it shocks and jars every single member of the community in Australia is something that stands out, right?
Hmm. I mean, it's often observed by people from colonized countries, the developing South, that the colonizers, the settler colonizers, we simply are not used to death. We're not used to massacres and tragedy. I mean, one of us gets shot in the street, we all cry, and really that's the way we should be. I mean, it's terrible that some people get so accustomed to death, but it's certainly worth pointing out that a massacre on this scale, maybe even twice this scale, happens almost every day in Gaza. And that sometimes people say that this is um, the the third worst massacre in Australian history. And that's because they're only looking at recorded history where there's actually a clear number, because there are hundreds of mass graves across Australia for the First Nation people. That these mass graves are not marked with any gravestones or stones at all. They're not in the history books. And they were done so casually that they weren't recorded, you know? for some of these mass murderers in Australia's convict history,
Hmm.
these massacres were not worth a diary entry. But I can promise you that if Australian archaeologists want to take their job seriously, we would find that this is nowhere near the top 3 massacres in Australian history. And I hope that no one, and especially the Jewish community, doesn't get used to this.
We've come a long way from the baked in crimes and tragedies and massacres of old as modern Australia crunched its Indigenous population all the way. And the crime that happened on Sunday is something that does stand out in a country full of people that embrace a peaceful society. Many
Mm.
people that come here, as you mentioned, come from war zones, come from conflict, where there is direct tragedy in their own families. And people like Ahmed Al Ahmed value the shared values that we have in this country. And one of them is a country where people can have barbecues next to each other and be free from violence, where their kids can kind of play together and not have to worry about their political problems following them to this country. So it's a disgusting act, and we should be talking about it a little bit more later with regards to the response. But firstly, I wanted to speak to you about, you attended the vigil there on Bondi, and I wanted to get a few words from you about your experience there and what you saw when you went along.
Sure. So I've been twice now. Um, to me, it was a matter of sentiment, nostalgia, and mourning, an act of mourning that I actually saw the Chabad Lubavitch stall out, and I saw some rabbis out, and and prayed with them, and took a menorah. I've been lighting the menorah every night since then. I am an atheist. Have I changed my mind about God or the credibility of the Jewish religion? Not really, but to me, this is an act of mourning, and um, attending the vigil is a meaningful, you could almost say even spiritual experience. I mean, you grapple with your own mortality when you visit a massacre site. There's um, thousands of bouquets of flowers in this circle, and the masses of people come and go and gather around the circle. There is, ceremony after ceremony after ceremony with non-stop speakers and people visiting, everyday people as well as, important people who take themselves too seriously. And um, it goes on, through the whole day. I would not be surprised if there's people who stay there as well through the whole night. Um, and I mean, I'm not sure if you could say it's being exploited by bad actors, because it it's certainly politicized, but I believe that frankly the victims who were Chabad, and they weren't all Chabad, but majority were, they would certainly want to be remembered in this way, and they would want to be honored this way. I'm sure the victims' families are quite active in the way the vigil is being organized. They do attend the vigil regularly, as well as other rabbis who were there and who are from the Chabad community. So how is it being politicized but not necessarily exploited? Well, there's maybe 20 or 30 Israeli and Australian flags everywhere. There's lots of people wearing Israeli and Australian flags as clothes, as capes, as t-shirts. There's people wearing IDF merchandise. Um, there's rabbis leading the masses in singing the Australian and Israeli national anthems pretty much roughly once an hour.
Mhm.
Um, and flags on top of the bouquets of flowers. Um, these aren't my flags. I wouldn't want to be remembered that way. But I don't think it's, how do I say this, untrue to the victim, to the memory of the victims who died. I am from that community, and I firmly believe that this is actually what they would likely want. So.
And the consensus there is one of sorrow and solidarity, I imagine. Does it act as a bit of a ground zero essentially for the Jewish community? Could you see this vigil turning into a longer term monument or something that is carries on for weeks and months ahead?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, at least when I visited the whole crime scene. I mean, half of Bondi Beach is a crime scene.
Mhm.
It's roped off, right? So you get pools of dried blood, prams, foldable chairs and tables strewn all over the place, tents, clothes, right?
Mhm.
And they need to preserve that because of the forensic evidence. And I mean, that is going to take a very long time to go through. Um, but I mean, it does remind me a lot of what's happened with the Nova Festival, which was attacked on October 7, where essentially the Israeli state has preserved it still to this day, 2.5 years later. And
Mm.
I wouldn't be surprised if this crime scene on Bondi Beach, where the Hanukkah event was happening, was preserved for quite some time, perhaps long after the forensic evidence has been gathered, to create some sort of memorial site. Yeah.
Mhm. And it's so been the site of some political attention too, right? I mean, not only have the media been there since pretty much before the bodies had even fully entered the hospital there, the media was on site, but you've also got this kind of political aspect there too. Dan, did you witness some of the political figures that had arrived at the vigil?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, Avi Yemini is walking around like a rock star over there. He's a far right activist who pretends to be a journalist. But he did grow up Chabad Lubavitch in the same community, but from Melbourne. And he comes from a pretty well-known family in the community. So, I mean, despite his far-right politics, he is actually able to, I guess, get some pretty candid man-on-the-street interviews at the vigil. But I mean, I always roll my eyes, frankly, whenever someone says, let's not politicize this, because, if someone can't afford bread because they're broke, that's political. If someone is a billionaire, that's also political. Um, when someone gets arrested on a street corner, that's political. There are questions about police powers and responsibilities, let's say. So really, I think when people say, let's not politicize this, it's pretty much a way of just saying, let's defer to the status quo and the narrative of the state and state authorities and media elite without questioning anything. This narrative of let's not politicize it had reached its expiry date before the the shooting was over, really. There was already fake news, Islamophobic fake news being spread around, and different um, all sorts of different rumors and questions around why the ABC had taken several minutes to confirm that it was a Hanukkah event rather than just initially they just reported it was a mass shooting at Bondi Beach, and they copped some flack from the Jewish community for taking a few minutes to confirm that it was specifically an anti-Semitic terrorist attack. So, naturally with terrorism, it is going to be politicized. I mean, that's the definition of terrorism, to target civilians for the sake of, spreading fear in the community for a political purpose. So what's the mood over there? Well, I mean, Tony Burke, the shadow minister for home affairs, was hounded out by the masses, walked away with his tail between his legs. Susan Lee, the leader of the Liberal Party, dropped by, said we're going to deport anyone who says anti-Semitic slogans and is on a visa, who's an immigrant. And we're going to, really crack down on all the anti-Semitism. And Pauline Hanson came in and dropped by and said, this isn't what Australia is about, that, we need to be able to have freedom of expression. And of course, she was quite quick to point the finger at certain groups of people who she thinks do not believe in her so-called, Australian dream of freedom of expression. So, essentially she's saying there's a zero-sum game. We protect Jewish people from anti-Semitism by kicking out the Muslim anti-Semites, who are all apparently immigrants, and that's the way we maintain Australian identity. And what's so alarming is that Pauline Hanson got a standing ovation. This is the complete opposite of, at least my understanding of what we should take as the political meaning from a massacre that targeted a religious minority. And I mean, I think it's important to end on this note when it comes to how it's being politicized. If I could draw on the Jewish religion for a bit, it says in the Pirkei Avot, which means the ethics of our forefathers, it's essentially the founding texts and chapters of the whole Talmud. In chapter 2, verse 3, Rabbi Gamliel says that we should be careful when dealing with the government. They befriend a person only for their own needs. They appear as your friends when it benefits them, but they do not stand by a person in their time of difficulty. So we really think that by getting more police powers, more restrictions on protest, more restrictions on immigration, more laws, more legislation, more everything, surveillance, that's not going to protect shit. And it's going to make everyone less safe, everyone more on edge. And frankly, it's giving the fascists, which includes Nazis and Islamic State fans, they're all a fascist ideology. It gives them exactly what they want, which is ultra-authoritarianism. The only thing is that it isn't in the government that they once hands. They want a different government, but they want an ultra-authoritarian state. So the state gets more authority. It's just right now we have a Labour government in power. So how long will that last? Maybe till the next election.
Yeah, that observation is the one that sticks out, because there will be some other political iterations that come along in an election cycle or two that have a different take on all these restrictions that are being put on our freedoms, right? And, the sight of Yemeni Joyce and Hanson there together in that photo really encapsulated how there are political opportunists from everywhere that are trying to come in to, capitalize on this issue right now. And I was wondering if I could ask you now about, those political figures, because I wanted to speak about Josh Frydenberg, who seemed to make his political comeback speech from the very place that you were speaking about, which is being memorialized to some extent. So can you tell us a little bit about what that means, and if you were there when that happened?
I'll be honest, I haven't read his speech, but I have seen his terrible acting when he was grilled on ABC and took offense
Yep.
at being told it seems like he was trying to launch his return to political power, which he did announce just quite recently too, that he was planning a return. So I think it's fair to connect the dots, but I haven't read the speech.
All right. Well, we'll move on to the actual, nuts and bolts of what happened here. Now to the response, Yakov. Wanted to talk about the actual police response, ASIO's response, and the government itself. Do you have any remarks about the bones of this actual investigation, how it was conducted, and revelations that ASIO had one of the shooters on a targeted list, but there was training done in the Philippines? And also, can you speak a little bit to the initial confusion about the identity of the shooters themselves?
Yeah. So there was quite a lot of confusion generally about the identities of all sorts of people at the event. I mean, there were reports that the shooting was going on for 40 minutes before police showed up. It in fact went for 10. And I mean, it is quite embarrassing though for police in terms of the logistics here for many reasons. There were 2 police at Bondi Beach at the time. We are talking a beach in the peak summer on a Sunday afternoon, good weather, with an event, a religious event in the park, with I think it was around 1,000 or so people there, and an annual event. So it wasn't even like it was a one-off or a surprise thing. They've been doing Hanukkah at the park and Bondi Beach for for many years. So there were 2 police there. By the way, the nearest police station is about 5-minute walk away. And then there's a handful of other police stations, maybe 10 minutes drive away. So what took them so long to get another, I mean, even 10 minutes for a live shooter is a bit surprising, frankly. And also surprising that they didn't have like big guns, frankly, come there fairly quickly. I mean, Australia is known, of course, for having some of the strictest gun control laws in the world. And I think that is frankly a good idea, but there are serious questions about how these terrorists got the guns in the first place, because there are 1,000 reasons why an application for a firearms license can get knocked back, including whether you are someone with a criminal record or you're someone on an ASIO watch list. They don't even need to give you a reason for why it's been knocked back, so you don't necessarily know that you're on an ASIO watch list. And of course, you also get it knocked back if you're living with someone on a watch list or with a criminal record, often. So the terrorists were a father and son duo. The son was on a watch list for a very long time. I believe since 2019. And ASIO, essentially the equivalent of our FBI, did not notice that this guy on an ASIO watch list was living with his father, who has 6 firearms legally owned, has licenses for them, and they are heavy duty, maybe you could call them sniper rifles or like sharpshooter guns, shotguns too.
On a tourist visa as well, right?
Yeah, on a visa. And visiting Philippines with these Islamic State terrorist hotspots where ASIO knows that there were training camps being ran at that particular town. I believe it's not confirmed if they actually attended those camps, but I mean, it seems pretty likely from what I understand. And then, and they literally just came back from the Philippines as well. It isn't their first suspicious visit overseas. they just came back from the Philippines. They were there for a while, about a month, and then they returned about a month ago. Immediately told their friends and family, allegedly, that they were staying at an Airbnb in Jervis Bay, um, south of Sydney, um, for a fishing trip. Um, and they were just fishing and swimming and scuba diving all day. They used that time to train and gear up and get ready for everything, and then uh, you know we're ready to go last Sunday. But it's pretty embarrassing for police that it was even able to get here, with all the resources they have, with the strictest gun control laws in perhaps almost the world. They still weren't able to stop these people from somehow getting um, firearms licenses for sniper rifles and shotguns. Now, while I do like gun control laws, um, to me, the answer is not at this moment more gun control. I'm satisfied with what we have. And generally speaking, if anything, when someone has unprecedented um, powers and responsibilities and resources to perform their job, let's say the police agencies, and they still mess up and they still do not actually use what is available to them, then you don't reward them by giving them more resources, powers, and responsibilities. You strip it, generally, you would strip it away. I mean, if John from finance doesn't know how to use an Excel spreadsheet, you don't um, give him a supercomputer to do the financial spreadsheets. You say, we're going to move you out of finance department. Okay. So we don't need more gun control laws. We just need to actually, if anything, use what's already available to us. I mean, the Nazi protest outside New South Wales Parliament House is a great example already. I mean, all of the available laws to stop that from happening were already there. And in fact, they used legal avenues to get a Form 1 application approved to have their right to protest. When whatever you think of those laws and whether they should stay or not, I mean, it seems pretty obvious that it should not have been granted to NSN, to the Nazis, if the law was actually implemented in the way it was designed to be used.
And everything's very reactive in all ways here of the response. You've got a reactive measure that's done in a pragmatic mindset, which is the gun restrictions, further gun restrictions. Then you've got things like the state government of New South Wales doing reactive kind of measures with a ban on mass protests, or what they're talking about doing. And then and then you've got more reactive measures which are adopting the anti-Semitism envoy's recommendations. So can you explain how that those measures have worked when we have so many questions to be asked about the nature of the attack, the attackers themselves, the failures of intelligence and police to find these people? I mean, like, if you could ever track someone across that AFP network, it would be through those Southeast Asian terror networks, where we have established lines of communication with counterparts in Philippines and Indonesia. And we've been monitoring people going to places like Mindanao and Aceh for decades now. It seems like a huge issue there. And the reactive measures from the government, are they addressing what could be the fundamental flaws in all of this?
No, not at all. I mean, the answer simply is that the Israel lobby is dictating to the federal and state governments in Australia exactly what they want, exactly how they want these law reforms to be phrased. And they're getting everything they want and more. Um, and then when they get everything they want, they push further. And then after that, especially in the wake of this massacre, I mean, Albanese has said, "Oh, I acknowledge that implementing Gillian Segal's plan to combat anti-Semitism in full is not going to be enough to stop a massacre." And by the way, she's already buffed out her plan in response to this. So, um, Albanese is going to go even further now. That's what he's promising. And on top of that, we're getting the same from our state governments. So, with the Nazi protests outside New South Wales Parliament House, it is very obvious that this is in breach of the new state laws, giving police the right to arrest people for promoting racial hatred against a particular group. We saw this with the protest outside New South Wales Parliament House by the National Socialist Network, the Nazi group here. And it's pretty obvious that all of the laws are already in place to stop this sort of protest to go ahead. Now, reserve your judgment about whether police should actually have the power to stop that protest. The reality is that these laws exist, and they do. The Executive Council of Australian Jewry and other Israel lobby groups essentially dictated to the New South Wales government some amendments to the criminal law. Specifically, they said, well, we've come to realize that police did not make any arrests at the Sydney Opera House for the chanting that was allegedly anti-Semitic, saying gas the Jews, later found to be a doctored video. So the Israel lobby said, well, we've come to realize police did not arrest anyone. So, if you had this law already in place where it was a crime to promote racial hatred against a protected minority group, then you could have made arrests at the Sydney Opera House. So, let's try and legislate retrospectively. And if there ever was a test case to run, it would be National Socialist Network protesting outside Parliament House, saying we got to take our country back from the Jews who run things. The irony is that their sign said abolish the Jewish lobby and the Jews run things, and then you have the Israel lobby disguising itself as a Jewish community group saying arrest these guys, these Nazis, for calling us the Jewish lobby. We can't have this. And of course, this is exactly tied, they would say, to the Palestine protest movement, which criticizes Israel all the time. And it's two sides of the same coin. And I mean, how bizarre is this? So all of the laws are already there for police to use, and they're failing to use them. They are incompetent, despite having more power than they've ever had. So why would we reward them with more? With the Gillian Segal's plan and the recent adoption, I mean, now we're looking at banning mass protests in New South Wales. I believe it's temporary while we are in moments that are, it's poorly defined what those moments are, but responding to terrorism.
An incredible thing to do, though, nonetheless.
Yeah. There was previously a law banning protests near a place of worship, even if the protest wasn't specifically about that place of worship, and the word near was not defined by a clear distance. They specifically refused to name a distance. So, in other words, potentially if there is the Church of Scientology setting up shop in Sydney CBD and you're marching for affordable housing nearby, if a cop doesn't like that protest, they can say, well, you are protesting near a place of worship and the Church of Scientology is registered as a religion. So it was designed to be used at the police officer on the scene's discretion. That law was knocked back by the Supreme Court of New South Wales, who called it unconstitutional. And then the Israel lobby and Chris Minns responded by saying, well, sure, it's unconstitutional, but what if we just bring it back in a way that is constitutional by exploiting some loopholes? So now they've introduced legislation that it's a crime to, I believe it's intimidate or harass someone who is attending a place of worship, right? Attending, I mean, what if they're walking and they're 30 minutes away? You know, what if you are protesting a synagogue which is hosting IDF recruitment events or an arms dealer conference on the inside, like what happened at the Great Synagogue in Sydney CBD in December 2024, right? What if there's arms dealers or IDF recruiters inside and you're chanting Free Palestine, and a Jew feels very intimidated as they're attending this place of worship with an arms dealer event, right? I mean, it's just so poorly defined. Is chanting Free Palestine intimidating? I imagine it depends on who you ask in the current government, which judge sits on at the head of the table. So we might just figure out.
As they try to cram this thing in, it's going to cause a lot of alarm across many sectors of our society. And you will have also a lot of lawyers being involved on the other end here, as in different industries and different walks of life, for breaching some of these new laws that are coming into place. I want to ask you more about the media a little bit now. The media has played a big role in defining what we see today. And I want to ask you, how much pressure do you think the media is putting on the government to carry out all of these recommendations in full?
Oh, I don't think they are, but I simply think that there's a number of different elements to it. I mean, it's difficult to deny the requests of the grieving parties, and they are a very conservative, ultra-Orthodox, religious, nationalist community. It's difficult to say no. It's difficult to not platform them. I mean, I would say it's right to platform them in this case. It is their tragedy. And it's also difficult to just not have round the clock coverage on this that eats up every single headline. So again, you have Israel lobbyists pretending to be from Jewish communal organizations when 40 hours a week is dedicated to defending the state of Israel. With Gillian Segal, I mean, her plan to combat anti-Semitism, it's so sweeping in its reforms of law and of public policy. And it literally says that it is recommending changes to every level of government and every level of our society and culture. So it says that in the report. And those include recommendations to the way that the media is reporting on events, things like there will be a fact checker, strongly implied to be Gillian Segal herself, or someone from her office of the national broadcasters, ABC and SBS. And I think that was actually a turning point where they realized, we don't mind if the Israel lobby polices every other level of culture and society, but wait a second, they're coming after us. And Gillian Segal copped an absolute grilling on ABC TV from Sarah Ferguson, right?
Right.
And I mean, she was specifically recommending that only approved narratives that aren't quote unquote anti-Semitic per the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism get published, right? It's essentially banning any meaningful criticism of a foreign state. So I don't believe the media is on board with all of these changes, but they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, especially now more so than before, because of this massacre.
If you're enjoying programs like this with unique and skilled insights from people like Yaakov, at a time when the country is undergoing rapid changes, some that impact on social freedoms themselves, it matters so much to little podcasters like me that you get on, like and subscribe my platform on YouTube, your favorite podcast, or head to boganintel.com to get access to all my articles, all these podcasts, and more. Your support is really valuable. And if you're feeling generous this festive season, potentially give your friend or family member a gift of a subscription to Bogan Intelligentsia for only $50 a year. It's not a bad offer, really. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the program. And the media's response has been almost confused. We saw another 7:30 interview the other night where there was a tough question asked towards Frydenberg about his political motives. But the media is front and center here. I mean, we've seen Ray Hadley on site with Sharif Markson. The commercial media is running an agenda that may or may not be coming out of Tel Aviv itself. And we've seen Netanyahu and Israeli senior cabinet members get involved in having their 2 cents worth about the tragedy here in Australia. Malcolm Turnbull stood up the other day to warn against that and essentially warned Netanyahu to stay out of Australia's business. But how much does this international pressure via Tel Aviv affect the decision-making of the Labor government?
Oh, it seems a lot more than anyone wants to admit. That includes you, myself, Albanese, ASIO, and Mossad. Well, actually, some of the most revealing news stories on this topic actually come from Israel itself, because I guess they wouldn't like to call it influence, but they like to brag about the supposed quality of their intelligence agencies, knowing things all around the world. So, I mean, the first thing that came out of this in terms of intelligence was that apparently Israel had tipped off Albanese and ASIO weeks ago that Iran was planning a terrorist attack against Jews here in Australia sometime very soon. I mean, these guys were waving Islamic State flags. If Iran and ISIS were suddenly allies, it's kind of like Voldemort and Harry Potter.
Oil and water,
yeah. They couldn't be two groups who are more opposite each other. And in fact, ISIS primarily targets Muslims. I mean, they are the main victims. There are easily the vast majority of the terrorist attacks by ISIS are against mosques that they consider to not be following the real true Islam. I would say ISIS is almost like a different religion in its own way, and it is in fact not the real Islam. But this isn't the first time Israel has claimed that Iran in particular is coordinating all of these nefarious actors.
This is also not the first time ISIS has popped up and caused a national crisis in another country around the West, right?
Of course. And it is the first real, I would say, ISIS style of attack. But also it's not really fully clear how decentralized this was, if they, the extent to which they had assistance from outside groups. I mean, there is actually one really interesting breaking news story as we speak. You saw what happened down at Liverpool. Several Arab and Muslim blokes in a car, and they were arrested by the New South Wales Police Counterterrorism Unit. But I mean, these guys look like Special Forces SAS from the army. It was a full-on operation in the middle of a busy suburb in southwest Sydney.
Using extraordinary counterterrorism powers as well, right?
Yeah, yeah. They arrested these guys. They found a knife in the car, and they had received a tip-off. There was a conference from the police commissioner of New South Wales just, a couple hours ago, where he said that they had received a tip-off from a partner intelligence agency. He refused to say which one. He refused to say it was ASIO. He did say he was also working with foreign and domestic agencies. And that they had received a tip-off that this group of Muslim Arab guys in a car were driving to Bondi to target Jews. They then arrested them, detained them for, I believe it's almost a day, released them without charges, released them without any serious evidence, are unable to determine exactly where they were driving or if they had any motive to attack anyone at all, whether they had any intention to go to Bondi. So, I mean, I'm really questioning.
And whether an ISIS cell has been activated in a way that has multiple groups of people involved coming to do crimes against Jewish population in Sydney, right?
Yeah, yeah. And previously, these tip-offs coming from Mossad, and we know this because of news stories by the Israeli media itself, and by their darling journalist in Australia, Shari Markson, who very willingly does Mossad's bidding, is always ready for a leak. We know that Mossad has also tipped off ASIO about apparently Iran is coordinating local motorcycle gangs to hire deadbeat criminals for a couple $100 worth of crypto to graffiti cars that say Allah Akbaru, Hitler on top. That was on a synagogue. They graffitied a car with something like the PKK is coming. The PKK being the secular Kurdish militia group in northern Syria. Now, I mean, if Iran was, they've also alleged that Iran is tied to the Socialist Alternative, a local Trotskyite group active on uni campuses. So, I mean, if you stuck Iran, ISIS, a Trotskyite socialist, and a Kurdish militant, Hezbollah and Hamas in the same room, I promise you they could not agree on how to boil a kettle of water, right? They would not agree on which way to sit down on a chair, right? To think that these guys are all somehow coordinating terrorist attacks across Australia, targeting the Jewish community with some sort of criminal mastermind plan is bonkers. But it's resulted in us expelling the Iranian ambassador.
It has had an effect. Even after the fact, when we find out that Iran wasn't involved, it's made us send home and suspend our diplomatic relations with Tehran. It's had that effect, and now we only have to worry about how much this Tehran narrative can keep running, because there are people willing to push it, as you say, in the press and even in the political sphere now. So is Iran back on the cards? I've been talking about this for a while in my writing. I think Iran is actually something that's a little bit closer than many will think. Do you think that this is another way for Tel Aviv to get another stab at Iran?
Yeah, well, it's generally the way that it gets, the West civilization, for lack of a better framing, on side with another war. I mean, I think it is not far-fetched to consider the possibility, at least, of something like a coalition of the willing that went into Iraq, going up against, Iran or Russia, something like that, sometime in the future. And, Israel sees itself as battle ready, tested, ready to go, on the cutting edge of military technology and strategies. And, they're an aggressive pit bull in the park with
That needs to
long-range.
be fed a lot from the outside, or else he falls over and starts getting very lethargic very quickly. So, I mean, this is the issue. It's always been the issue. And Netanyahu's made it his career's work trying to bend American presidents to go to war with Iran, right?
Of course. And in terms of foreign interference, I mean, I don't think, was it the last time we expelled an ambassador? Was something like 40, 50 years ago. But here's a clarification. The last time we expelled diplomats
2010.
was what, 2011?
Yeah,
Israeli
2010,
diplomats
2011. That's right, Stephen
were
Smith.
forging Australian passports to use in assassinations across the Gulf states, and it seems also European countries, assassinations on foreign soil. So so much for our closest friend in the Middle East, right? Our closest intelligence partner. These guys are forging passports and recruiting Australian spies into Mossad so that they can use our credibility as a country that has good diplomacy with many others around the world, and they can just fly around and shoot whoever they want in a hotel if they consider that person a target worthy of
I
assassination.
mean, last time something like that happened was 2010, and Stephen Smith did send the diplomats home, but that was the last possible location that we've had of an independent foreign policy against Israel, you could argue. And ever since then, the DNA has completely changed under Julia Gillard, who replaced Rudd, or may not have replaced him because of those actions, or partly due to them. The landscape's changed, the bipartisan landscape towards Israel. And you have to think that potentially that act was the last moment that Australia stood up to Israel.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's also worth pointing out that a very well-known cardiologist, Professor Peter MacDonald, one of the best in the world at heart surgery, put on notice and unpaid leave for asking a panel, which actually I happened to be on, whether ASIO was mad to take Mossad's tip off that Iran was behind these graffiti and arson attacks, targeting Jewish neighborhoods and Jewish-owned cars, Jewish-owned community centers. He was fired for that when, in fact, actually Shari Markson from Sky News had already published a story saying that a Mossad source who wanted to be anonymous had confirmed it to her.
The idea of Mossad collaborating with our intelligence agencies and doing more so of that in the new environment is quite a chilling thing. Albanese's response in a few days has gone from, a solemn condolence to heralding national gun bans to adopting the anti-Semitism envoy's plan. Now, do you think that the government had the sympathy of the Australian population as it was coming under pressure from outside forces, from the media, and from other political entities in the country? And do you think the government will maintain that public support as it moves forward through some of these measures?
I think, well, it's difficult to answer. We're going to have to wait and see. I think you're absolutely correct that the rollout was a disaster for Gillian Segal. Her appointment on day one, a disaster. At this moment, I think it's probably got the most support I've ever seen it get. it seems. Again, it's very hard to deny the requests or demands of a grieving person or grieving community. And with there's a saying in politics, and let's limit this to Gillian Segal, who is not from the Chabad Lubavitch community. Not going to apply this to the people who are from there, but there's a saying: "Never let a good crisis go to waste." There's a Jewish American writer called Naomi Klein writes about the shock doctrine, which is essentially that when a disaster happens, whether it's a natural disaster, a hurricane or a terrorist event, it's the perfect opportunity to just ram drastic law reforms and changes through very, very quickly without much debate. I mean, Dave Milner wrote about this just was it yesterday in his article. There's the Patriot Act, right? Straight after 9/11. The skeleton of the Patriot Act was already drafted beforehand. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that means 9/11 was an inside job, but suddenly they realized this is the perfect time to go full speed ahead with this. Let's get this draft done as quickly as possible. Strike while the iron's hot. And of course, if you oppose the Patriot Act, it's pretty easy to call someone like that unpatriotic. So
Initially, it was, and then as it dragged on, that it stopped being that way so much. And with
right.
this instance, 9/11 was an attack on all Americans, and this was an attack on all Australians. But I wonder that if this gets kind of compartmentalized by elements in the Zionist community that want to politicize this, that want to gain some geopolitical advantage for Israel out of this, for example. I wonder if that will isolate that narrative over time.
Yeah, I really, it's hard to predict the future, but 20 years later, the Patriot Act is not very popular. The war in Iraq, war on terror, not popular. And it isn't always like that. I mean, there was a similar crisis, let's say, with in Australia with the MV Tampa ship, where there was a lie spread by the Howard government that children were being thrown overboard. A ship carrying all sorts of refugees and asylum seekers, and John Howard, the Prime Minister at the time, essentially asked everyone, are these the sorts of people you want to grant asylum to? Are these the people we want to adopt as Australians? Let's not. And that was really a turning point in our immigration policy, and we've only shifted right since then. So, Australians are pretty conservative in immigration. They weren't always like that. I mean, there was you could say, a heyday after Gough Whitlam and Fraser that immigration was quite popular and supported until John Howard turned the tide. So it's quite difficult to see how these reforms proposed by Gillian Segal will be seen years from now. But certainly support for Israel is falling drastically. People are becoming more and more critical. But at the same time, the ruling class and the establishment, while they are, moving an inch to the left every few months on Israel and Palestine, they are really lagging behind and not keeping up the pace, increasingly out of touch with the masses on this. So we'll wait and see how it really goes.
And there's a danger of putting that pressure compounding upon a national tragedy that at the moment, in the wake of it, all Australians are united in grieving together on. But if it becomes a us versus them kind of thing, and if Australians feel that some of these laws are taken up by the population in lieu of responsible intelligence, police, and government measures that could be done by them instead of bared by the society of Australia, it could be a little bit of a kickback at some point. And we are living in a world now where for 2 years straight, over 2 years, people have seen what has been going on, what Israel has been up to. And the majority of this country are aware and quite critical of Israel's behavior. So, yes, I mean, the government has to be really careful about the way it walks with this one, because hammering home the wishes of Segal and her plan comes at the expense of the social cohesion the government's talking about so much. And I wanted to finish off a little bit about our multicultural country. And what this move by the Albanese government to adopt the plan, but also the response, the way the media's handled it. What does it say to multiculturalism in Australia, and to the way our media and our government use it or cherry pick it at certain times to advantage?
Mm. It's quite interesting to compare this with the Christchurch massacre in New Zealand several years ago, where Australian government and media really just rinsed our hands of any responsibility, said, happened in another country, not our problem. We'll send our ambassador over to express their condolences. That was about it. We forget that it was an Australian man who did the massacre. About 3 times as many people died than compared to now. And he specifically traveled to New Zealand to do the act. He was radicalized right here. He was approached and attempted to be recruited by different Nazi groups over here too. And we just kind of said, not our problem. And then with this one, well, it's targeting Jews instead of Muslims. And our response is, again, it's not our problem. It's not Australia. This isn't what Australia's about, apparently. It's the immigrants. It's the immigrants we're importing.
We disowned Brenton Tarrant. We've disowned the genocide of the Indigenous population. And we're also disowning our involvement in this tragedy too, right?
Yeah. And so, the media class and conservative political parties are now saying, we can solve this by deporting all the immigrants.
Deport all the immigrants and silence all the people, and not address the one thing that's causing the most anti-Semitism on this planet, which is the rolling crimes that are occurring in the Middle East, right?
Yeah. And the whole irony of it is that these father and son terrorists actually got their visa approved under the Howard government. They got their firearms licenses under a later Liberal government. So really, I mean, this has nothing to do with Labor being weak on immigration, which it certainly is not weak. It's quite strict. So with where we're at now, I mean, the 20-year anniversary of the Cronulla riots, a real flashpoint in racism and its history in Australia. That was a couple days ago. And even before the Bondi Beach terrorist attack, there were people reaching out to me saying, I'm scared. I feel like there is this facade of social cohesion and our multicultural society, and it's just tearing apart. It's falling. And they were worried even last week that we're about to see Cronulla Riots 2.0, a 20th anniversary celebration of it. There are ultra-nationalist far-right groups promoting what they call a Bash Wogs Day around Australia.
You have to wonder how much of that, how big those events are, right? I mean, surely these are, decentralized kind of occurrences, or are they coordinated
It's
events?
it's difficult to say because the nature of fascist ideology is to gaslight the masses and dog whistle, and they tend to not be decentralized. They tend to organize together very clearly, but they deny any association when they get questioned on it because they their ideology is to have a loose relationship with the truth. And if you tell them that they are dog whistling or lying or clearly associate with each other, they'll just say, "Oh, are you mad, bro?
Mm.
We trolled you." So, I mean, the March for Australia, that was pulling crowds of, I don't know, 10,000 people. Um, Middle Eastern people were bashed after that event, at that event too, across Australia. The Nazis had their homecoming ceremony. I mean, in Sydney, they rolled the red carpet out and marched down to ACDC on the loudspeakers and signed some autographs and took some selfies with fans. Some of whom, by the way, were actually plants who were Nazis themselves and
Yeah.
were, told to stage all this as a theater, but it actually worked, because there is this. It's hard to tell what is the theater that is scripted and what is not. So there is a Bash Wogs Day being promoted around, the internet. There are multiple celebrations of uh, January 26th, Invasion Day or Australia Day coming up, which are looking like they are at risk of really popping off in a bad way. And I'm really worried about the way that this Bondi Beach massacre is going to lead our country. I worry that the Cronulla riots reenactment might not begin um, because of Cronulla locals or at Cronulla or even because of Nazis. It could begin because of far-right Zionists. Um, so
And these far right Zionists are looking to harness the far right, the native far right population of Australia. The one thing that they have to do though is drag that far right cohort in under their banner, which hasn't happened yet, I
yeah,
suppose. And there's a competition for that far right energy, isn't there? Really, in Australia right now, between the
yeah,
Nazis,
and of
between
course,
ultra Zionists, between a lot of groups.
Tommy Robinson, the man with too many different names and passports and pseudonyms to count, with very close ties to uh, um, Israeli intelligence groups. um, he really, really loves Israel. He based his racist fascist group full of Nazis. I mean, some of them are tatted up Nazis, and convicted pedophiles in the English Defense League, this gang that he started. And he explicitly said it was based on the Jewish Defense League,
Well, didn't he
a
change the name to
Zionist
include?
group that was.
He changed the name, didn't he, from English to English and Jewish Defense League or something like that?
Uh, I believe, maybe. I believe you're testing my memory, but yeah,
So yeah, he's
yeah,
right into it. He's been in the Mossad t-shirt. He's been, he's been a big fan for many years, and that's right. It does seem, and even in America with the Tucker Carlson versus Mark Levin and all that sort of thing, there is this competition for the right amongst nativist, far right Christian nationalists versus the Zionist ultra nationalists as well. So it's an incredible battle.
what anti-Semitism is and the way it's spreading. I think this is really important that anti-Semitism is seen as a zero-sum game. You either oppose anti-Semitism and support Islamophobia sometimes, or you oppose Islamophobia and you support anti-Semitism. That's the framing, the dichotomy that some in our media class are promoting. I mean, you have far-right groups like the Australian Jewish Association who say, how dare our government equate these two forms of racism by by appointing special envoys for both. I mean, the irony is they support a Jewish voice to parliament without any votes on it, and they also oppose, by the way, the referendum for an Aboriginal voice to parliament. So, you know, Gillian Segal holds a special place. And the Zionists love this theory of anti-Semitism and the way it is, where they really describe it as like this viral contagion that spreads, you know.
Referred to
If
as
you're,
cancer cells by Netanyahu.
yeah, I mean, they literally describe it as like an illness. They use words like virulent to describe it. The world's most ancient form of hatred that infects society, and it spreads, they'll say, and it
Pathogenic.
spreads
Yeah, yeah.
through society.
Yep.
Yeah. It's like, you know, if you're at a Palestine protest and you're holding a banner with an anti-Semite, you might catch the germs.
Mm.
Or if someone sneezes on you at a train station, you know, you might catch the
Well, it's
anti-Semitic
funny,
bug.
Yaakov, because some of the messaging coming out of the government at the moment is about eradicating that virulent contagion. And it's sort of
Yeah.
being framed in that kind of way. We will eliminate anti-Semitism. You know, we will.
And this is very deliberate. This is very deliberate because it completely detracts it from any um, cultural or political analysis, any socioeconomic structures.
It also raises it over the the maelstrom going on with racism more broadly in this
Yeah,
country, right? And it
and it,
elevates and compartmentalizes it from the racism, which is a massive issue in the country.
yeah, and by pathologizing it as if it's a disease that spreads, you're also creating a pathological, almost, you know, vitriolic reaction to people. Like you feel, oh, like the world's most ancient hatred, like, you know, when the Zionists are preaching to the choir about anti-Semitism, those people's the hair on the forearms start to stick up. They get the goosebumps when they hear these things, and it's very important to point out anti-Semitism is just like every other form of racism and discrimination. It spreads because of cultural, social, economic, and political reasons. Something like a genocide committed by the Jewish, so-called Jewish state is certainly a contributor. Something like a disproportionately powerful group of lobbyists for a foreign state who pretend to call themselves Jewish community leaders, that is also a contributor. And that isn't to, you know, let every anti-Semite off the hook in this country. I mean, there are anti-Semites and different types of racists everywhere, including, frankly, in the Palestine movement, despite that the movement is fundamentally built on anti-racist principles. But with anti-Semitism, it is not any different from anything else. You fight all forms of racism and sexism and discrimination and class warfare at once. You fight them together by connecting the dots, by making everyone realize, no matter what you believe or what color your skin is, there is a ruling class that look very similar to each other, act very similar to each other, and all have very similar interests that are not yours.
And augmenting a national tragedy on Australians and taking it away from an attack on Australians to an attack on something else is another thing too, because we are grieving together at the moment, and as this thing gets pushed and pulled around by competing interests, it may actually destroy what this thing's all about, which is mourning the death of 15 people and the wounded, and having respect for the wounded and their families. I'm a fan of Michael Parenti, and he always says "Cue bono." And I wanted to ask you about who benefits in the aftermath of this tragedy, because so many people have suffered. Who actually benefits? What were the shooters trying to achieve? And how could they have benefited, or the people that whose interest they're serving benefit?
Well, let me begin by saying who doesn't benefit, which is the Jewish community. The Chabad community, people died that day. Gillian Segal is getting everything she wanted. she is not a Jewish community leader. She is an Israel lobbyist. The Israel lobby at large is getting what it wanted. The Netanyahu government, blaming this on Australia, recognizing Palestine as a state, and our government is absolutely on its knees begging for forgiveness from Israel for this. And I think also just generally, I mean, terrorists always thrive on notoriety. So, ISIS is basking in its glory right now. Different terrorist groups and different political extremist actors. The Nazis are absolutely ecstatic over the fact that the New South Wales government is doing everything they can, and the Australian government, to ban their attempts to launch a political party, because they point to the High Court of Australia in 1951, a landmark case where our government tried to ban the Communist Party, and was actually found to be a breach of the implied right to political expression. And they know that this is they talk about this being a layup case for them, where they can be martyrs of failed attempts at political persecution, failed attempts to silence free speech. So they're certainly benefiting from this. And I think overwhelmingly the real direction of this police crackdown on protests and the ramping up of surveillance and the police state, it's going to be directed at Palestine protests, like the Land Forces Expo the day before the Nazis were protesting outside Parliament House, a peaceful protest outside a huge arms dealer conference with hundreds of different companies, Israeli companies too. There was spray paint and pepper sprayed and tear gassed, and even rubber bullets were shot.
Yeah.
So I think it gives you a pretty good sense of where this crackdown is going. We're giving the state unprecedented powers, responsibilities, and authority, and fascists are on the rise. Pauline Hanson has tripled her poll numbers since the last election. So what happens when a fascist like Pauline Hanson wins government with the coalition of the Liberal Party, let's say, and is now helping out with running the state that has all of this unprecedented authority? We've just given the fascists exactly what they want.
And bowing to the fascist demands, we know how that works out. It always works out really good for everyone, doesn't it, Yaakov?
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming on, mate. It was, a really heavy circumstance to have you on, but I couldn't have asked for someone better to help explain to the audience a little bit about what's happening in and around this horrible tragedy. So a pleasure to have you on, mate.
Thank you.